How's everybody doing? You're here, right now. And it's beautiful outside. And we could all be photographing birds right now, right? All right, so this is the dumbest question ever. How many of you like photographing birds? How many of you caught yourself halfway through saying you shoot birds? I'm trying to deprogram myself from using the word shoot ever. My name is Mike Corrado, and thank you guys for coming to spend the next 50 or so minutes with me. I am here, and I do work for Nikon. I have for 35 years. It's been a great company to work for, but I'm actually going to take that hat that I wear as the lead ambassador, the head of ambassador program, working for marketing, and working with this amazing team internal to really talk more about the passion of photography and one of the genres of photography that I've gotten into that I almost fell into in the way of photographing birds. And I can tell you this is a journey that will probably never end. I'm so fascinated by birds, and the whole process of learning about bird behavior has been quite an extraordinary journey. And I plan to learn a lot more, but it all started for me at a little lake out east on Long Island where I would go with my family and just to enjoy the ducks and the geese and some of the swans that were nasty on the lake. And then I realized there were heron, there were night heron, there were egrets, there were great blues, and I became very fond of cormorants. Everybody familiar with the cormorant bird? This really cool, interesting, probably one of the ugliest birds I've ever seen, but in the right light, the eyes are the most beautiful that I have ever seen. So we're going to talk about a lot of things that kind of go through my mind. Probably you'll feel by the end of this that there's a bit of insanity in here, and that would be the truth. I mean, who of us as photographers aren't insane when you think about standing in remote locations for hours on end by yourself and trying to have conversations, sometimes even arguments with yourself, and you win your arguments. And the worst part is when you start thinking about that you don't have a defense to your own argument. And I start to get a little mental there, but I sing to myself, which is good because nobody can hear, and I sing to the birds. I'm sure somebody else is going to claim to be the bird whisperer. I'm not a bird whisperer at all, but I do feel like you have to have connection, with your subject. So just a quick skinny, I am from New York, 35 years with Nikon. My dad had a darkroom, connected with photography, went to school for advertising design, came out more with a passion of photography. And that's where I ended up going. And my dad, by far, my mom was an artist. My dad was a technician. He was a photography hobbyist, but he was an engineer. And always kind of pushed me to understand why things are the way they are, because especially when it comes to sports or wildlife photography, the more you know about the subject you're shooting, the more you understand the behaviors, the more you can try to be at the right place at the right time. And when you're one step ahead of whatever it is you're photographing, you will walk into happy accidents, I promise. And, so this program is entitled Focus on Flight. There's a little bit of a pun with the way of autofocus and how I set the camera up. We'll talk about some technical things. I don't want to bore you with technical, but I get asked a lot, how do you set up your camera? What are the technology you're using to focus? What kind of frame rates are you working with? And I want to show you that my attempt here is to make dynamic pictures of birds. And don't get me wrong, I love birds when they're perched, but the action and the movement and the impact that's created from the flow of a bird flying, which is one of the most difficult things to ever photograph, not only because it's difficult to find them, if they are skittish, it's hard to track them, and you have to get lucky every once in a while. And I'll take you through some of my disasters. Do any of you have a pair of shoes that look like this? I have now gone through 4 or 5 pairs of shoes. I actually have a winter boot set now that I wear in the summer with shorts that I can just wash off when I get home and try to save money on shoes. But this is the nature of the beast of where we are. You do these things, you sacrifice time, you're up at all kinds of hours to try to get to the right place. I mean, I remember getting up early once at Stony Brook Lake, and the egrets were roosting in one particular area, and before the light ever came up, they got up, they took off, and they flew out. And it forced me into pan shots, which was interesting, but they were gone then for the rest of the morning. You just kind of play through it. I go through the mud, I muddle through things. But my intent is to really create the most impactful pictures of birds in their habitats and, in flight, to just try to create some drama, some detail, something that's going to impact you. And it's interesting because I have a slide in this show about the things I think about, which I actually pulled from my portrait program. So the way I think about portraits and the way I think about sports and the way I think about photographing other areas, genres of photography, actually applies to bird photography as well. And we'll talk about that as we go. I love the sky. I love the contrast. I love the challenges. I mean, how many of you have a lot of great, beautiful pictures of birds with stark white skies? And how do you work your way around that? And it's a trouble spot, but it's a part of what you have to deal with in the nature of this kind of wildlife photography. I've actually studied enough to understand what bird may be coming from a distance. How do you do that? I watch the speed of the wings and the way the wings move, as quickly as the wings move. I don't think anything moves faster than a duck, so I can see when a duck comes. But I also love when you can carry really nice shutter speeds and create that little bit of motion with some action as you go. So impact, spending many hours there, realizing that I have lied about going home and saying that, I'll be home in a few minutes, and it turns into a few hours, and I know that I'm a liar, and I'm saying it, and I'm lying, saying it, and I know that I'm lying. But when you get there and you feel like if you leave or depart just that minute or two early, something's going to happen, I have to be really tired and exhausted to pick up and move, or else I will just hang there. So patience is a huge part of all of this. And I bring this picture in because, again, I would think about this in portrait photography or any other photography, rock and roll, when I'm photographing someone on stage. It is our responsibility to make your subjects look good. And just because I can't talk to this egret and see whether or not they like this picture, it is kind of funny how the egret in a certain part of landing looks like a rubber chicken to me. And so I want a more dynamic image. I want something, I don't mind that image. This was actually for an article for Nikon World magazine way back when on teleconverters. And I'll talk to you about the gear that I use, but I'm a big fan of teleconverters on long tellies. And habits, the nature of all of this, the interaction between adult and chick is something huge for me. And so this little lake in Stony Brook has turned into these regular ventures down to Florida now. And anybody, y'all live here in New York or on the island? Because someone can tell you, I just brought up before, the eagle that's in Centerport, the nest that's in Centerport. I love how viral this community is with communication when someone sees something, and apparently there are a lot of people going out to photograph the eagles. So in 37 years of photography, I'm not going to take you on this full journey, but I have always loved action, and I've always loved things in the air and in flight. And if it's jumping or it's moving, or there are moments that are challenging enough that if you miss them, you're not going to get them back, that is where I go in photography. And so it's natural that, photographing birds, similar to the way I love to photograph action, that all plays hand in hand to the way I shoot. And rather than dig deep right away, I wanted to show you some of my favorite bird photos ever. And maybe you can associate with some of these pictures. I do say to myself, why did you just do that? Why did you just shoot that picture? How many of you got a picture like this? I got thousands of these, right? There's a bird in there. You just have to look really hard. How many of you seen this before? I love this picture because it's such a horrible picture. You're going to win some, you're going to lose some. I mean, that's just the way it works. You're going to think you're going to be ready, and then you're not. And, I've studied cormorants so much now that, it's pretty obvious after a little while that if they dive and they come up with a stick in their mouth for nesting, they're going to take off. They didn't bring that stick up to just sit there. They'll play with it a little bit, and I have a really nice collection of cormorants with sticks, which is not exactly exciting, but it's almost a challenge because the bigger the stick. But I've done this before. I think maybe in the action of kind of going up, I inadvertently tripped the shutter, and this is absolutely one of my favorites. Now you have to really dig deep to see the bird. These don't work on the. But, when you miss, man, if you're going to miss, you got to miss big. Because if you miss just a little bit, I promise you, it pains you more. That's why I need therapy. Because if you miss just a little bit, you live with regret about why didn't I do it right the first time, and how could I have gotten the eyes of that bird out. Yet if you miss like this, you don't care. I blew it. Throw it away. You don't care. There's no psychological attachment to that at all. Now, I wanted to get past the poop pictures, all right? Who's got poop pictures? There's absolutely nothing funny about poop pictures. All right, they're disgusting. A bird is taking a crap. That's what this is. And there's nothing glamorous about it, and the light could be perfect, and the bird could be perched in silhouette, and you really think this is a good picture? So can we get past the poop pictures? Keep your own little collection, share them the way you want to. Don't ever bring them to me and ask me to get excited about them, because I won't. So think about these things like for anything that you shoot. I want a genuine connection, but not just a connection between the subjects, like a mother or a chick or parents and the chicks, or within the siblings. I want a connection with me and the animal. I need to feel like whatever it is mentally is there is connected. I want genuine moments. Life is about moments. Photography is about moments. I don't care what genre of photography you're shooting. It is all about that precious moment. Gesture, you hear this all the time. This is basic photography rules or thoughts to get yourself going, but that connection and gesture of the subject within that moment is so critical to making a good or not so good picture, something with impact or without. It may not make sense to you here, but I love photographing birds with eye contact. If I'm in the right place at the right time and you can actually have the bird look into the lens, you're not looking to startle them. I am not a fan at all of harassing any kind of wildlife. You take yourself to a place, if you do get noticed and they look at your camera, that's not a horrible thing. But everything is about location and timing when it comes to the outdoors. I don't think I probably have to tell you that, but it's always nice to remind yourself that, again, you may have to be up and out earlier than most, stay out later than most, especially this time of year when the sun sets later, to make sure you get the best pictures you can rolling away. And I'm always thinking about the camera and lens selection. We'll talk more about this, but I would say that that's all situational to me. If I walk out without a notion at all about what it is I'm going to do, I may go light with like a D850 and a 2 to 500. If I know that I'm going after something that's a distance away, I'll try to either borrow a 600 from the MPS locker and a set of converters and not know how far I can go. But I can guarantee you up here as I stand in front of you, all I want is the longest telephoto I can get, until that telephoto prevents me from shooting pictures. And that's happened before, going down to Florida with a 600 when I really needed a 70 to 200 because the access was so great in some of the water preserves that we photographed in. But to me, to bring it back from all of those really bad pictures, it's about the art of birds. It's about trying to do something different. I've seen a lot of incredible bird photography out there by a lot of incredible photographers. But how do I do this on my little lake in Stony Brook when you are very limited with the subjects that you have? That is my challenge when I'm home. But about a month ago, a little over a month ago, I actually met one of my friends from Nat Geo, a kid named Keith Ledzinski, who's amazing. And we decided that each year we're going to go back to a different location and photograph birds or look for wildlife. But I want to create these moments, and these opportunities will come, and you'll stand there for hours and nothing is going on. Then all of a sudden you'll stand there for hours and you got a little bit more going on. And then there are times where it's just, there are egrets feeding and the tides are at just the right place. And we'll talk about what I do to figure that out. But I'm trying to create really nice art with the bird photos. And I hope you like some of these, and I hope I'm doing the right job. But always looking for different angles to do something strong. And always making sure, just like I would in a portrait, that the eyes are tack sharp. That's just a personal preference of mine. You can call art whatever you want. Maybe in that crappy batch of pictures, some hotel will buy one of those and you'll watch that while you're resting in the bathroom or something. I don't know. But I want sharp. I want details. And if the eyes are back focused, or it's just back focused on the body slightly or up on this beak, it's not where I want it to be. I want those eyes ripping sharp if I can get there. So just moments. The interaction, the genuine moments. This is everything that I typically go after. And I'll get as tight as I possibly can. The advantage of the lake is you will have ducks and swans and geese in pretty much close proximity. The cormorants will never come in close. The great blues will never come in close. The heron, egrets won't typically be there. But I love the whole idea of design. And I've had people tell me, I want to see more of the swan's head here. And I just kind of like it the way it is because the detail of the water drop seems to work for me. It's a very subjective thing, but that's my kind of deal. So what am I considering when I get out there? Well, you certainly need to know your locations. You have to study. There are too many apps out there that'll tell you where the sun will rise and set to not know where the sun will rise or set on any given day. And when we were on this trip, we actually got a motorhome last month and we rode all over Florida. The hurricanes changed the season a bit. It changed the tide levels. It changed the water levels in certain places. At points in times early on, towards the end of the winter, there was too much water in the Everglades. What happens when there's too much water? It's harder for the birds to eat, so they're going to populate somewhere else. And I'm just learning these things. And anybody get to see Ron McGill's program? I'm so angry he went home because he's the guy that I turn to when I have to identify certain animals and birds. And there's one in this program that I really don't know what it is, and it's an Asian bird. And I'm sorry, I'm not going to know that, but I'll tell you. So camera lens selection, I talked about before. Autofocus modes we'll talk about. It's always about light direction and composition and what you can do. If you're too far from a bird, what do? You try to work the bird into the environment a little bit, into the habitat where they are, and work with the basic fundamentals of photography, which would be rule of thirds, lines, leading lines, anything I can to create some kind of movement. And then, of course, working with the motion based on the habits. I will sit there and watch birds wash themselves for hours, because I know there's something really cool in there, and if I keep adjusting shutter speeds to slow them down, you get water spray like there's no tomorrow, and it creates this real weird kind of motion art and a little bit of panning. So for me, I kind of try to keep it very simple. Right now, the bodies I use for very specific reasons, the D850 because of its resolution and its speed. I use the battery pack that allows it to go 9 frames per second, so I really try to bump it as quickly as I can. You got monster 47 meg files. Why do I want that? If I am not close enough, it almost acts like a converter to crop in. And while I'm talking about cropping, when it comes to bird photography, and I do the whole thing about do you crop, I crop every picture I shoot. That's just the way it is. Sometimes I get away with a really cool full frame. Where I have a problem, and I'm sure everybody does, is when you start to crop in so much, it may still look pretty good for the web, but you can never print the picture. That's when you have to say to yourself, when do I take a crop too far? And what is the purpose and intent of using it? And yes, we all crop from time to time, but when you're cropping this much out of a frame this big, it may hold up a little bit together for your monitors, but it's not really a good finished picture, and I try to avoid that at all costs. If I can get that long lens, like I said, great. I am a huge fan of teleconverters. I typically use a 1.4 and a 2x. If I really need it, I need it. The 2-500, again, sits perfectly with any of these cameras. D500, can you imagine having the effective focal length of 750 millimeters that I can carry around and walk longer and endure a day a little bit easier? That is part of the process here. There's a lot of walking involved. Get yourselves a Fitbit to count the amount of steps you make on any given day, because you could hit 10,000, 15,000 steps in no time if you're walking around the environment. Because there are moments when I'll sit there for hours, but a lot of times I got to pick myself up and move, especially when you're trying to track some of the birds and find them, and they're skittish and they take off, and they'll go 300 yards pretty quick. It takes me a lot longer to go to 300 yards. But I'll show you a little map of Stony Brook and how I actually made friends with some of the neighbors there. I know Joan, I know this guy Paul, and they all have houses there that I've kind of like been nice enough to say, hey, if I can kind of work my way in here, it could be a great spot to shoot. I'm going to show you pictures with the new 180-400 that we released with a built-in TC. That's part of why I was down in Florida. But I actually got close enough to birds. Anybody hear of a place in Florida called the Wakatahatchee Wetlands? Wakatahatchee? Wakatahatchee. I don't know if I believe you. Is that the truth? Wakatahatchee? What are you doing here? You know how many wood storks are in there right now? Were you? So amazing, amazing place. And I was actually so close because the boardwalks there are in the flight path of the wood storks and the birds to the nest that I swear to God, I ducked once with a 20 millimeter because it was too tight. That's how phenomenal this stuff is. So, yes, yeah, it was. Wood storks, by the way, are not endangered. There was a point in time where they were. They're not endangered anymore. I think there were like 200 nests there, something crazy like that. Yeah. So I know this is going to sound horrible. I know you're going to see this live somewhere, guys, tuning in, whatever camera's on. I don't use monopods or tripods when I'm photographing birds. And I don't say that to break the rules. There are great heads like the Wemberley heads or different things that you can do on tripods. Because most of what I'm going after are birds in flight, I can't swing something up that quick. I've got to be up there already. I've got to see them coming. I've got to line them up. I've got to then start to track. And once I'm there, if they could easily come up like this. There is no rig up there that's going to be able to do this for me without being awkward. And you have to keep a flow. If you don't keep a flow of the pace, it's going to throw you off when you start to shoot. So it's all about a timing issue. I'm not doing it to be machismo. I'm not doing it to be, a lot of these long telephotos, believe it or not, you can hand hold. They're much lighter in design, different elements, not different elements, glass elements, but lighter materials on the outside make them so much easier to work with. I can tell you that I used to use a monopod with a very old Nikkor 600 millimeter lens. It was so heavy. The newer versions of these lenses are not, and it's pretty remarkable what they're doing. So focus on flight. For me, when it comes to any kind of photography, I'm looking for that impact moment. This is, say it again, Waxahachie. I got it down now. You know, someone once complained because I said Canadian geese. And he was a nice gentleman who came up to me at the end of the program and goes, it's not Canadian, it's Canada. All right, so it's a Canada geese. You can't say Canadian. I don't know why, but they're not even from Canada, I don't think. I don't know. But this is a great blue, and this was photographed with a 500 f4. And, you know, one of the things that's really cool, the habitual nature, the repetitive nature of what the birds are doing. If you've ever seen birds nesting or going for nesting materials like sticks, most times they'll go to the same place back and forth that time that they're going, so you can line up a different shot each time you go out. And I think it's a great ritual, especially the great blues, when they bring sticks back, they share it with the mate grabs it with them. It's almost like there's a transfer process, and, you know, but I want impact. This is with an 800 millimeter 5.6 with a teleconverter with a D810. Early on, April at the lake, we'll talk about the quality of light. It's not bad to have flat light and clouds overhead when you're photographing birds. Sometimes contrast, especially with egrets or any white colored bird, would be a big issue for contrast, especially at the wrong times of day. But I live for shots like this where the bird is coming right or feels like it's coming right at the camera. And again, how did I figure this one out? It wasn't rocket science. After I figured out that every time one of the cormorants would come up out of the water with a stick, they were going to take off. Well, it was in my direction or not. Whether that's going to happen, I don't know. So those are always the things you can't. But you try to figure out the flight path, and when you see this lake from overhead, you'll understand. But powerful moments. And I don't care. This is with a 504 with a very minimal crop. That's what I want. We're going to talk a little bit about light. Light direction is so important to me at the lake or wherever I go. That quality of light is what brings out the color in that cormorant's eye. Because if it's caught from any other direction than head-on light, you are not going to get color. It's going to go real flat, and it's going to go real muted. And what's amazing about it is when the light hits it right, you can almost see the really cool pattern around the eye as well. I'm fascinated by cormorant eyes. Maybe I get too into this. I'm sorry if I do, but that just blows me away. Same day with that same egret. Does the egret look a bit more majestic than looking like the rubber chicken here? And this is what I'm talking about, finding that moment, you know, in flight where the bird looks great. I could photograph egrets all day long and just trying to follow where they're roosting, where they're perched, whether they're in a group, do they move at a certain time of day. Sometimes you have to go back 4 or 5 days in a row to figure out what they're doing and where they're going at a certain time during the day. When are they going to take off? When are they going to come back? But there's nothing I love more than light coming through the wings of a bird. When the D850 came out, this is with a 600 f4, of course we wanted to test resolution and speed and focus. And listen, I'm a Nikon guy, and I know you guys know that, but I wouldn't be if the quality of these images weren't as good as they are. And that means everything to me. I could care less about any feature, whistle, or bell. All I want is that quality when I zoom into that image in an image editing program. But the feeding process is something that's always fascinated me as well. So this is with the 180 to 400 TC. This is at a place in Florida called Gatorland. Has anybody been there? Well, it's natural for birds and the habitat around gators to populate, and they grow nests there, and there's probably like 50 nests. And some of them, I'm not kidding, I'd be standing here and the nest is right where you are. That freaks me out, because when you're a kid that grows up around Stony Brook Lake and you don't have anything that's that close, you feel like you're being cheated here on Long Island. I feel like my friends, they'll send me pictures of gators. They're rolling catfish around in their mouths, or they skewer a huge fish that's bigger than that table. I get none of that in Stony Brook. And that's why I've been flying to Florida more frequently. How many wake up and go to work or go to wherever you go and feel like this bird right here? So when I talk about impact and moments, where we'll talk about focus techniques, I needed to be dead sharp on those eyes. And I snapped off about 6 pictures. 4 of them were sharp on the eyes. 2 of them I missed because I moved back and forth. But I'll always use continuous focus, and I'll talk about that in just a little bit. So this is where I threw on the 8mm to 15 fisheye on the D850 and the D500. Why with the D500? Because I had a little bit of a crop value there that took me a little bit tighter. But I'm telling you, when the birds come overhead and you feel the wind from the wing, and you feel that whoosh. Anybody ever feel that before? A bird comes real close by, and you can feel the power of that wing in flight. That's like a really cool feeling. But these are all done with a fisheye lens. And there were moments when the birds came really, really close as they came in for landings. And just being very careful not to obstruct the path of the bird at all. And a little bit of crop takes away that fisheye effect. So I can get the best of both worlds here. This was as close as I could get, within a few feet away. And I actually used a focus mode that I wouldn't typically use for birds called auto area. So I didn't have to look through the camera. I was actually hand holding the lens, the Cameron lens, and I use this auto area mode because it will always focus on the closest subject to the lens. And it did a pretty amazing job in flight. So just trying to have a lot of fun with that. The terminology I'm going to use is within Nikon. I completely beg you to find out whatever system you're shooting. Learn about their autofocus system. There are so many different modes to choose from these days. You may not be using a tracking mode if your pictures are not coming out continually sharp in a series of pictures. I can't tell you how many Nikon people come to me and they're so far off the mode they should be in, thinking they're in continuous focus and the S mode for a single point, and that's not going to track nearly as well as the modes that are designed to use with tracking in this camera. So group autofocus, and I'm going to show you the targets here. I use group autofocus 99% of the time when the birds are at a distance. I'm not worried about depth of field issues. I'm looking for a bigger cluster and target within the framing, which means everything to me. Then the other tracking mode in the Nikon line is called dynamic tracking. And I'm going to show you the grids for this as well and explain why. But dynamic relies on me picking one spot, and then there are other sensors active around that sensor in case I lose my target. And I come off the subject, the other 70 sensors of 72, and you can do up to 153. Choose one and 152 others are going to be working with you. But I do that for very precise focusing, very detailed focusing. And then there's a technology. Have you ever been sweeping along with a bird and photographing a bird or any subject like that, and it goes beyond a tree? And all of a sudden the tree becomes an obstruction. There's something in Nikon cameras called focus tracking with lock-on where you can actually tell the camera to delay from jumping to another subject too quickly if you know this is what you're doing to different degrees. So there's all kinds of technologies that help in a big, big way. So this is group AF. There's actually 5 sensors working together. These 5 sensors create a bigger cluster. Why would I worry about that if I'm working in tight situations close up? Well, because again, on the principle of the closest subject in any one of these 5 areas is what the camera is going to gravitate towards. I could hit a beak and miss the eyes if I'm too close. So I'm very specific about where I go. But birds in flight, up in the air, at a distance, you can't beat it. It's one of the best tracking modes I have ever used. So out in the open here, the 5 sensors working together. And I can move those 5 sensors around the frame, around the entire focus area. But when I'm open here, I feel so free to be able to use group. When they're coming at me like this, why would I care about depth? And they're so far away on the depth chart here that when I focus on the front of the bird, everything that I need sharp within the head and the eyes and the wings is going to be sharp. Wide open, group area. Wide open, group area. This is that transfer of the stick, the twig between the 2 great blues down in Waxahachie. I love that. That's so much better than Waxahachie. How long did it take you to learn how to say that too? Because it took me months. It is. Are you liking these? Tell me you like some of these. Make me feel good. All right, good. I have issues. I have ego issues. Now I know. But I love the process and I love the greenery and that connection between the two. But group autofocus works great here. Even if one subject is a little bit further away, I've got a much bigger target to work with. So D72, Dynamic 72, there's other options, Dynamic 21, Dynamic 9, Dynamic 72, Dynamic 153. D72 works best for me because imagine I get to pick one sensor, move it around, but the cluster of 71 other sensors moves with it. So the point is if I miss the bird, or I start targeting the bird and making pictures, taking nice pictures, and the bird slips off that zone but stays within that 71 other sensor area, the camera's going to be smart enough to track it with it until I can get back on target, which is a really, really cool technology. I'll take anything that saves my bacon when it comes to focusing. The worst thing that you could have happen is have that moment and it's not focused right, and that's when, again, you kick yourself. But you have to also say, too, you're selling yourself to the technology, and there's nothing wrong with that. So as you could see early on as I demonstrated, I take a lot of pictures out of focus. I miss frames a lot. I jump too quick sometimes. It's just the nature of the beast. But you can see how that all works together really, really nicely. But when I do have birds coming in tight, I really have to be sharp on top of the head there, or as close to that eye as I can get as they're sweeping in, which is the worst challenge in the world when you're trying to track a moving subject. Certain compositions, when there are birds between birds, I want to isolate that focus point right on the heron, the great blue in the back. And of course, why would I still be in continuous focus? Because I can easily be doing this with my own body and moving back and forth, or their heads are moving. I still want that tracking capability, even though they're not moving very quickly. Different sides of the frame. Now I could have used group over here, so that's not a problem too, but sometimes I'll isolate single sensor and just move to the right. This is down in Florida as well, in one of the largest breeding grounds for osprey in the world, and that's a place we keep going back to that's pretty phenomenal. But through the brush, if you ever tried to shoot through brush, you have to have a single point to do that. The group focus here would not work. It would pick up all of the limbs of sticks or twigs on the outside, but you really need to be precise with a single point on the inside, especially when some very cool things are happening. And again, I'm always looking to target the eyes when I make those pictures. So the track it would lock on, these are just a couple of example pictures, but when I shoot through the trees, I kind of like the ambiance and that look of the bird going through the trees. That stark sky thing gets old really quick. Even a blank blue sky doesn't work after a while. And when you do this time and time again, have you gotten bored with any of your pictures? Has the word redundancy ever come up when you've looked at things? Don't stop shooting. I'm begging you, as redundant as it seems, there's always going to be something that you don't have from the moment before. So just keep going with it. I have libraries of the same crappy stick, twig pictures of birds in flight, but somehow, some way, all of a sudden, the bird's going to pick up a twig that you don't think they can handle. So I have this thing, it's like a little mental game out there. Which bird is going to actually win the contest for picking up the biggest stick during that session? But you'll see it. And again, twigs, twigs, twigs everywhere. But focus tracking with lock-on will hold focus even if that bird goes through the trees, as long as I don't lay myself in the trees for too long. So these are my 3 favorite places to shoot. I haven't gone outside of these areas. And I really do enjoy shooting at the Bronx Zoo and making pictures at Zoo Miami. These are friendly, photo-friendly places. And a lot of times, too, the way the exhibits are set up, the birds' natural habitats come within the zoo, even at some of the other exhibits for some of the other animals. But again, when you want to learn what the species are, or who a bird is, what a bird is, who do you call? Your friends at the Bronx Zoo or Zoo Miami. Or you get a Merlin app or something like that. I mean, there are all kinds of apps. But then I got to, where are you? Okay, I'm on Long Island. I'm in what did the bird look like? Well, it's got spots. I mean, it's got a red eye. And then you got to kind of, I'd rather call Ron and ask. But this is a beautiful inlet over in Stony Brook, and there's a lakeside as well. And this is the lake, and I put some hearts for my favorite places where I go. And this is where Joan lives. And this is where Paul lives. And there's little blocks that you walk, and you walk all around the thing. And again, you're going to hit sometimes, you're going to hit some great times, there's a lot. But before I ever go out, I'm studying the landscape a little bit, and I immediately go to Google and I say, what's the tide level like in Smithtown Bay or Stony Brook right now? So I can see when the water's going down and when the water's going up. Why do I want to know that? Why would you want to know when the tide levels are changing? Feeding, right. And what is it that they're feeding? Are they feeding? Again, I don't think I'm ever going to have one of these egrets pull a shark out of the lake, but yeah. Small fish, worms, when it's really down, they dig for the worms. When it's up at a certain level, the pools of smaller fish that they go after. I mean, it's pretty insane. So just understanding the terrains and the behaviors means a lot of looking things up and trying to be at the right place at the right time. Weird things will happen when you keep going back. That's why I say don't ever prevent yourself from going back. Just a couple of weeks ago, I'm looking out there, and this is shot with a 2 to 500 with a D500, and I wasn't close enough, but this is not a big crop. I waited for them to move. I was begging. I do beg a lot. Please come to me. Please just turn left. You're laughing because you've done this before, right? You will the birds to do what you want, and then you realize they're not doing anything that you want, but it makes you feel good if they do. They never turned left towards me, but I thought this was as good a picture with the siblings kind of rolling behind us. I couldn't understand what was popping up. And at first, from the distance, I thought it was actually behind the swan, but the baby was actually laying up on the back and kept popping its head out. And I thought that was just an interesting moment I would share with you. I love motion and action. Yes?
How did you expose for that?
Yeah. Great question and exposure. I'm always, for the most part, unless the clouds are up overhead, I'm manual. I predetermine what my exposures are before I ever get out there. The only time is when the sun is in and out through clouds. Then I'll probably go to aperture priority wide open. That's my easiest way to go because it forces the highest shutter speed that I could possibly want. It's just my own way of thinking, but manual is probably 90% of the time. And that beautiful thing we have on the back of the camera, the LCD, lets me know how bad I can be on the first few shots. The question is, what ISO was used? And I will go with the lowest ISO that I can always go with, but the average, even in the day now, is between 800 and 1600. I want to make sure that I'm hitting shutter speeds of birds in flight at about 2,000th of a second or 1,600th of a second or no less than 1250. Imagine this, when you're dealing with very high megapixel cameras like the D850, you want as much shutter speed as you can possibly get to freeze and not have any kind of motion blur. It's a whole different philosophy, and I'm going to take some of you back to our film days. Remember the 1 over the focal length rule is where you should handhold the camera? That rule doesn't apply anymore. With higher megapixel cameras, take that rule and add a couple of shutter speeds on top of that, and that's where you should sit. So ISO would probably be as low as I can get. Some days it's going to be 200 if it's really bright and sunny out, but early morning light, late afternoon, I'm probably going to be closer to 400 to 800, and overcast days I may be up at 1600. Closer to 2,000. At dusk, I'm easily at 2,000 to 3,200, or at the beginning of the day, probably no less than 3,200. Yeah, the exposure has to happen that way. Question is, do you ever use auto ISO? I do not, but I know a lot of people that do. It's just, I'm kind of a control freak when it comes to certain settings on the camera, but I also understand the benefit of going from one dark area to a much brighter area and having the ISO make a shift for you. But I know a lot of people that do. So birds on the lake, the motion, movement. Again, I have a ton of stick images. But look at the light on this flat day. See how the eye's not popping as much? You're not seeing as much teal in the blue. The light and the direction means everything. This one wins an award. This cormorant wins an award for one of those big sticks I was talking about. When this bird was about to take off, I couldn't figure out how it was aerodynamically going to actually make this work. And I think it made a few passes by the nest because it couldn't figure out how to land. Sometimes that's an issue. And honestly, I don't know if it actually ever made it to the nest. That was a pretty big one. I love the sticks. But again, once they come up and their heads come out of the water and there is something in their mouth, they are going to take off. I love studying the feeding habits. Again, we talked about the tide levels. The fish that come up that you can actually see a fish. Sometimes I see these little specks of something, that these birds are eating and they're munching on. I need to see a fish. I'm sorry, I'm nothing against the fish. I know it's not a happy place for that fish right now, the two of them. But when an egret nails, two fish at the same time on the same beak, I always feel like that's a win. As the tide goes up, there's a little balancing act with the egret. So a lot of times they will fly from one little section to the next or jump, or the wingspan will come out when they dive in for the food. I thought that was pretty majestic and pretty. But again, no tide, low tide, worms, certain birds like the night heron that love that. Now, sometimes you have to consider around water, there is a protective shield that comes up over the bird's eye where you lose the color. Sadly, I lost the color here, but the moment is still there with the worm. And when they're in that mode, they'll be sitting there for quite a while. So you may have a really great opportunity to make some interesting pictures. Dropping the crab when they're feeding for crabs, I think it's beautiful. This is the same day with that D850, same bird probably. And I will stand there for as long as it takes. A little twig came out of the water with the crab, but then when that eye is open, the shield is down, and you see that beautiful color in orange. I mean, it's It's fascinating. That's the size. It's the biggest fish I've ever seen a cormorant come up with on the lake in Stony Brook by the grist mill. That's it. I've seen far better shots in Florida. But this is a place just outside of Orlando. And so to get away from Long Island was important to me because that's when I felt like I was really going to have opportunities that I just wouldn't have. And especially with Osprey, went down there a couple of years ago for an ad shoot. And when we found this place, it was pretty remarkable, the nature. And this is where the habitats come in and the beauty of the landscape. And you know, as much as I love tight telephoto, I will always back off to capture the landscape. These nests are the most beautiful nests I've ever seen. You know, when you go to the parks around here on Long Island and, you know, you see the osprey nests on top of light stands or some manufactured post system, it really takes away the beauty of the landscape. So you're always looking for that approach shot of the, you know, the parent flying back into the nest or a little head popping up over the nest, and they're always so high up. The angles are just not good. Here, since the cypress trees are in the water, the levels are much lower than you can imagine, and you just have to keep your distance. But opportunities come. Long telephoto. This is a 500 with a teleconverter, 1.4 with the D500 last couple of years ago. But looking for those moments, that eye contact, I said that before, it may not have made sense before, but when a bird's coming at you and there's eye contact with the lens, I just find that fascinating. And I just keep going and plugging away. We'll talk about light and direction, backlight, but we'll also talk about backgrounds that are so important. But you know, anything coming out of the backlight to me has been my favorite way of shooting now. How many people shoot backlit or love backlighting? I'm telling you, if you don't shoot backlit a lot, try it and dedicate yourself to doing it. It's a tough thing to do because the contrast becomes very critical, and the hairlines and the outlines are very, very critical. I'll show you a series that I shot. But this is down in Florida again, 500 millimeter lens, D500 and D5 combination. I'll bounce back and forth between cameras. It was before the D850 came out, but just went back there recently with the D850 and the 180 to 400. This is actually with a much smaller lens, a 300 f4, the phase Fresnel lens that Nikon has, the Nikkor, really tiny lens. And to be able to get some nice distance in telephoto with a small package to handle is very nice. This is with the 180 to 400 this year at that same place with the Osprey. Again, you could sit there for weeks and just enjoy every part of it. But as you continue to do this, the one thing I would ask is now start to get tougher on yourself when it comes to certain things. The wing position. Are the wings all the way out? Does it look beautiful? Are there broken parts of the wings? These are all little things that I'm now looking for when I start to get really, really tight with the way I shoot. Again, that beautiful environment with all of the beautiful, beautiful backlighting and light coming through, yet you hold the exposure. And I love the outline and that backlight on top of the birds, the osprey's back. But they're always doing something. And the toughest thing, and I don't mean focus in the way of autofocus, the focus in the way of mental to stay engaged. Because I promise you that too many times I've mentally given up or I start thinking of something else. And how many of you have done this? I look down at my phone and I start messing with the phone after I've waited for an hour and I just blew a shot because the bird took off. You have to really mentally stay focused and a lot of great things will happen. Again, eye contact is everything. The proximity is a lot closer, but a 500 with a 2x converter to 1,000 millimeters on a D500 body with the DX factor is a huge way to think, which is why I go that way. Beautiful morning light down in Florida this year. Osprey love the fish. Maybe somebody can tell me why they attack the top head of the fish, because there's usually never eyes or the head. Maybe that's what they eat first. That's the good eating. I don't know. But just the wings, the motion, looking for every feather to be where it should be or as close to where it should be. This is kind of interesting. What do you think this bird's about to do? Going right for the back. Little nookie. Little playtime. As it nuzzles its nose, its beak. And it bothers me that there's a tree limb there and it's right in the place where it's on the back and everything. But maybe that's a censorship thing. I don't know. It's not like anything's coming out. It's just they get together. It's a chemical thing, right? You've done this before, right? But coming in for that landing, there's a perfect example that coming into land, the talons are out. So I'm not going for the back action there. And these look very redundant, but I won't stop shooting them. You know, there's always going to be something that's a little bit different, but I'll start to pick things apart, like the wing clipping on the top and then it actually being a separation there. I'm that anal about the way I think of this now. It's just, again, you do it the way you need to. You find the beauty, and then when you start to find the beauty is redundant, find more beauty inside that beauty, and it just got to be right. Royal Terns down in Florida. I love this dance, and I love the mating ritual, and I love how they come together, and I keep pulling out that 500. Why do I keep saying 500 F4? It's light, it's long, it's easy to handle, like the 6, like the 8, a little easier to handle in both of those lenses. 2 to 5 would be great too. The look of a 5.6 lens versus the look of a 2.8 lens or an F4 lens is different, so there are reasons why I think that out, but when you're in there, you just hang in there for moments, and you'll see more of those Royal Terns in a little bit. I love chicks, I love babies. Sappy, whatever, call me whatever you want. I just love things that are growing and learning. Children, pets, egret chicks. I love that, and I love the interaction. This is actually cropped from a horizontal, and it's hanging in the Nikon booth next door. To me, it's the only testimonial I need for D850 or cameras at certain resolutions that I can actually play with the image, and that's what I mean. If I can make a crop and it stands up to a print, I feel like I'm within the boundaries of where I want to be. If I make a crop and it falls apart at a 5x7 print, I probably crop too much. Great if you want to share it on the internet, but that's about the only value. And I just look for these moments and opportunities. And again, I'm always thinking about the light. I'm thinking about the photo from a sense of the gesture in the moment. And you know, that moment that beak clamps down is really nice. And just that interaction and touch. The mating rituals of the Royal Terns is actually kind of fun. A lot of action. And it's almost like you're given a gift. You know, you can fight for this as long as you want, weeks on end, and not get any action. And we get down to the park, and there are all these Royal Terns, and they're mating, and it's the right time of year. And the on the back thing I think is pretty interesting from all angles. I thought this was cool. I call this, I don't typically label my photos or title them. This is the voyeur. I'm trying to understand. Did you want a piece of the action there, or? Get out of the way. But then the funky things happen. Everything happens from position, right? The two-headed Royal Tern. This is not photoshopped. It's just it's a position thing. It's just the way they're positioned. That's what the stuff. I kind of like that though. And if you look close, you can see it's in there. But anyway, it's all about the moments. We talked about the wood storks at Waxahachie. You know, I don't even think Ron McGill knows it's Waxahachie. I think he's called it Wakotahachie. I won't tell him. He probably knows. But in fact, Ron McGill, I went down there to shoot. We ran into each other because every week he would go back from Miami, because it's only, an hour up from Miami or so. If I was there, I'd be camping there. I would not be here. I would be camping there. It's that fascinating. And I'm not saying the wood stork is the prettiest bird. Do you think this is a pretty bird? To another wood stork, maybe. But again, the same habits, the same things. So it almost carries over with what you're trying to do. And then a beautiful moment between an adult and a chick in the nest. Another image that I've cropped from a horizontal. I typically tend to shoot horizontal more than vertical. But when the claw came down and just kind of nestled around the head, they're trying to push the babies down. Why? Because they're begging for food. And they're constantly crying for food, right? And the head keeps popping up. And at a certain point, they want to rest or they want to get through that day. It is, anybody watch this process? This is the most disgusting process of feeding any two people or things could come together doing. The process of going out and finding the fish and eating them and swallowing them, and then regurgitating the fish so the babies can then pick up the regurgitated fish. I feel for the fish, because when they come back out, it's like, what kind of journey were they on from that lake or body of water to now? And then these little infants, these chicks, take these big fish and they swallow them whole. But the violence, you know, the beaks that were together before, I mean, that's a violent act of cramming the beaks together. And I'm always worried somebody's going to poke each other's eye out with the beaks, as violent as it gets. But there are such great subtle moments. And go back to what I said early on with moments and gesture and the types of cool things that you can do when these moments happen between the birds. Always think about your compositions and backgrounds. The toughest thing to do when you go up against that stark white sky. I always look for color and blues. The closer the birds are to me, the distance they have away from the background is always, promising because of the velvety backgrounds. But even here, as much as I like this picture, I feel like the background is starting to become a distraction and can easily become too distracting, in the types of images that I like to make. I love this. This is this year with the 180 to 400 DA50. The Osprey came, made a quick bank turn towards us, got a nice series of pictures coming at me in the group autofocus mode. I hate the background. I do. I mean, maybe you can make me feel better about it, but I can't stand the background at all because it's too distracting. And I think you start to go from the bird to the green real quick. So your highlights and your colors will also detract. So I try to do whatever I can to keep these clean, subtle backgrounds where you still get a little bit of color and you get a little bit of change. But man, that light is just so amazing. Rule of thirds compositions, trying to find a way to fill the frame if I just don't have a long enough focal length lens towards the end of the day. I mean, here's a little cormorant popping its head up in the weeds. I don't think it's a great picture, but to try to work the frame or do something different, work with a lot of negative space and just try to put the bird somewhere in that frame to make it work. And sometimes it plays to your advantage. Again, the landscape and the environment, the habitat to me is very important when you're trying to tell these bird stories. But big, close, in the frame, in your face, that's where I'm going after most times. And I really want that as an opportunity to not have to crop. But I will not engage in the world of I never crop my pictures. I do all the time. I try to trim the edges. So I love the details. When you can get to these places where your location's pretty close, I don't put the 500 down. I just use it differently to try to get to details. I always love eyes. And I always love the details within a frame. And a flamingo's feathers, in the right light and color. 2 quick images, something in our cameras called picture control, Nikon cameras, where I can bump up the saturation in a profile. So this is actually using vivid mode from just the standard mode. And anything I can do in camera to save me from having to edit later on is important. 2 to 500 with a D500 at the lake 2 weeks ago. The cygnets are out there now. They're born. There's a lot of activity. The parents, the swans are attacking the Canada geese because they're worried about their siblings, the kids. Why wouldn't you, worry about your children too? But I love the detail shots. Again, that eye must be tack sharp. I try to do different things in the way of crop during the shooting and then try to crop a little bit more favorably in the post. This is the bird. I have no idea what bird it is, but I just love the texture of the wings and the feathers, and it's an Asian bird from the Asian exhibit at Zoo Miami. So I apologize for not knowing that, but I will, another Asian bird. But I try to get in tight. It's not always about showing the entire subject. It's not always about the wingspan, but man, I love when that wingspan is out. And everything's beautiful when the lights head on, and everything connects for you. A couple of wood ducks come out to this lake. That's like a gift to me. That's like holiday. That's a bonus. They're the most skittish on the lake. But man, when they come in close, anything I could do. This is with a 600 f4. But that light, that directional light, late afternoon, I position myself at the lake at different times of year because I know where that light's going to be. And as the light's starting to set and they come down at lower angles, that's the shot I want because it keeps them out of the sky. It keeps the background with trees. And I love it. I just want good, clean pictures. This is the shot I want of the birds with the wings out. I don't want that half-cocked thing, but if I get it, I get it. I just want dynamic moments. That sun right on the eye, that's where the eye starts to really pop. So it's really critical when you're shooting at certain times of day. Afternoon, this is actually a cygnet or a teen. I don't know what you would call a teen between a cygnet and a swan and a full adult swan, but you got that charcoal gray trying to grow out into white. And that sun coming down, or sun coming up early in the morning is really cool. I always love the reflection or pattern of the lake that kicks up on the bird, so I look for that. Side light, like anything else, this is in that Asian bird exhibit at Zoo Miami. They have trees, they have netting, and the light comes through precisely at a certain time of day, and you get some really nice cross light that comes through. This is at the Bronx Zoo. Not such a great day, but the nice colors come from the 50 flamingos standing on the rocks behind this flamingo. This is actually shot with the compact Nikon D5600 camera. But I love light. I love the details. I'm going to roll through these. I mean, is anybody going to question the quality of light and being at the right place at the right time? It's the difference between making magnificent pictures and not. Again, the flat days work, rainy days work. Pull out your rain gear. Grab yourself some stuff here at B&H to protect your body and protect yourself with ponchos and the equipment, and you'll see some amazing things happen. So on the flat days, you can still make dynamic pictures. And the good news is you're not worrying so much. But backlight is where it's at. I'm telling you. Do you trust me? Backlight is where it's at. Water that sprays. I don't care how ugly a cormorant may be to you. They're beautiful to me. But man, when they're in the right light, attacking the camera, coming at the right angle with fringe light, and you expose it correctly again, manual exposure, open up just enough, but not enough. I have to be looking at that LCD, and I could barely see that faint image of a cormorant, and I know I'm in the right exposure area because I want it to be depth, the depth of darkness and dark. But that's just so clean coming at you. And again, you know, there's no front light kicking a lot of color, but that fringe light around the wings, I mean, when they bank towards me, I mean, I just fall in love with this stuff. Light that comes through anything is always fascinating to me. So this hour goes very, very fast. Sunrise, sunset, give yourself time to get out there. You'll make remarkable pictures of birds. Just to close out, I know we have to wind this down. You guys have been amazing. We're pretty much done here. I'll close this out with just the motion shots. This is what I was talking about. Play with motion. You'll have a great time with it. But anyway, I want to thank you guys. This hour went way too fast. I could do this for a long time. Enjoy your birds.